Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode here of Crush Live Call-ins. I am your host here, Bart Hansen. It is Monday, February 17th. And of course, we do this show every single Monday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And if you want to get in on the show, you can click on the link in the description, and that will get you information about how to pre-submit your hand and how to format it, because you must pre-submit your hand if you want to be on this show. If you are a Crush Live Poker website subscriber, you will always get priority, and I read all the submissions. And if you're not, Michael G will pass along the best non-submissions to me. Shout out to everybody here in the live chat. I can see Michael G over there keeping it real. Love the live interaction. I was just taking a look at the WSOP schedule for a little bit that just dropped a couple of hours ago. That's kind of interesting. I'm not exactly sure what my plans are yet. I did do a direct day 2 buy-in into the main, but then there is a clump of about a week or two of events that I do want to play. So I'm not exactly sure what my whole story is. But today we've got 5 callers on tap. We have 1 non-hand call, which I think is going to be quite interesting, which also, too, a lot of you might learn something if you're planning on playing in tournaments at the WSOP. It's actually not a tournament situation, but kind of will play into that a little bit. So let's get into it here on February 17th. And we are going to go to our first caller, who is going to be Liam. Hello, Liam. You are up first.
What's up, Bart? How you doing?
Pretty good, Liam. I want to interject here for a second because I just saw a question that I just have to laugh about. Andrew says, Bart, have you ever played at Turning Stone in New York? Well, I played at Turning Stone before they even had poker, Andrew. I went there like a good degenerate on my 18th birthday. I took the Greyhound bus from the Syracuse terminal to play a little blackjack on October 16th of 1997, my 18th birthday. Then I never played poker there. They played, I think they had poker like when I got into a junior. Of course, there was no limit. But I played on Poker Night in America about 10 years ago at Turning Stone. So anyways, Liam, where are you calling from, sir?
Encore Boston Harbor.
Oh, that's right. Encore Boston Harbor. And this is a 1-3 hand, is that right?
Yeah, 1-3. Yep.
All right,
We're
so
about 6-handed.
1-3
Encore
from
the table.
1-3 Encore Boston Harbor. I saw a guy put out a tweet. I don't remember who it was. Talking about, he showed the list of Encore Boston Harbor 1-3. There were like 30 games and like 100 people on the waiting list like over the past weekend. They're like, is this the busiest like 1-3 room? It's not. I mean, Parks is bigger, but yeah, they do have a lot of like, they'll have a few 2-5 games, maybe 1-5-10, and they're just shitloads of 1-3 for the most part. That's the setup.
Yeah, they started doing the high hands on the weekends now in February, so it's even more of a shit show on the weekends.
Well, they lowered the seed on the high hands. It used to be 500. They take $1 per hand. It used to be 500, where you would get. I spoke about this a little bit on my flagship podcast a few weeks ago, but used to 500 a half hour during the week, during the day. Whoever has the highest hand, aces full, would get $500. And if no one had aces full, they would roll it over to the next half hour. I had 4 jacks with 7 minutes left a couple weeks ago in a rollover hour when there were only 10 tables going. I was like, this is great. I'm gonna get $1,000 for free, and then somebody hit it literally like a minute later. But this is a $500 buy-in, 1-3 Encore Boston Harbor. Okay, right?
Yep. Yeah, we're 6-handed. I have about 900 in my stack. And yeah, so under the gun, go ahead, and he opens for 15. I was probably playing with him for about an hour and a half now. I could tell he was a competent player. Like, he was opening a decent bit of hands. Wasn't too aggressive, but I could tell like he had a decent game sense. I kind of tried bluffing him previously in a hand and kind of got a little caught. And so he may have viewed me as an aggressive player, which might come into play later as we break down this hand. So he goes ahead and opens for 15 under the gun, folds around to me. I'm in the small blind with Queen 10 of hearts, and I elect a 3-bet here to 55.
So it is 600 effective. He has 600 and you have 600. Is that right?
Sorry, no, I have 900 and he has about 400 to start.
All right, so it's 400 effective.
Yep.
400 effective. Okay. So when you submitted this one in, I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting here because Queen 10 of Hearts is obviously, I mean, I guess you could call it like the worst suited Broadway, I would say, if you sort of start to rank them. He's raising up from under the gun. I mean, it is six-handed. I don't necessarily know how loose he is. It's a 1-3. So you've got the guy in the big blind. You're 400 effective. He made it 3x. This might be one of the times I actually might flat the small blind. I mean, you are definitely incentivized to drive the big blind out. And sometimes these games are like the big blind will just call when anyone calls. But you can sometimes size up the big blind. Like if it's a nitty guy and he's not going to call, you don't necessarily, I mean, you don't necessarily have to always three bet here in this spot. I mean, it's a non-anteed game. It's not a three blind game. The guy's coming for a raise under the gun. I suppose some pre-flop police might even say that this is a fold, but I don't think it's always a three bet. But you three bet to 55.
Yep. To be honest, I just love the hand, and I kind of wanted the action with it, and I like either three betting or folding out of the small blind. And it being six-handed, I wasn't. I mean, if it was a full ring and nine-handed, I might look at things differently in this situation. But it being six-handed, maybe I put too much emphasis on it being six-handed. I go ahead and make it 55, and he calls, so we're heads up to a flop.
So UTG calls. So you were kind of treating it like it was an actual low jack open, right? Which is kind of the equivalent of six-handed. UTG calls. So now about your sizing, you went just under 4x. Okay. He goes 50. You go to 55. He makes the call, so you're off to about 110 in the pot, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And the flop is four of spades, queen of diamonds, king of diamonds.
King of diamonds, queen of diamonds, four spades. So you flop middle pair.
Yep.
Okay.
I go ahead and check. I like checking. Just I hate to do the check to see where I'm at or bet to see where I'm at, but I just feel like people kind of tend to underbluff in these spots, and when they do bet, they kind of telegraph, the strength of their hand. So I got some showdown value, kind of pot control, and I check, and he ends up checking back.
So it goes check, check. Now, I would say that this particular board is probably mostly bet in a three bet pot when you have the aggressor on a too high type of board, especially if you're going to get four bet here by king king and you block queen queen. So I mean, it is a very very tight configuration though, because you are three betting out of the small blind against a UTG open. I mean, I don't hate the check in somewhat of an exploitable way. Like I'm talking about like checking more often than what is quote unquote optimal in live games when you have a medium strength hand and you can kind of tell what a guy's going to do based upon what he's betting. I break, theory rules all the time, so I don't have an issue with it. I just kind of want to bring it up. So it goes check, check, and you're still at 110. Okay.
Yep. Yeah, just one more thing on that. It's like when I see that flop, I tend to think this player, I don't know if he's four betting ace king, at 1-3. Some players are four betting the ace king, some are flatting it.
Mm-hmm.
So I figure when the king hits the flop, obviously he's going to kind of come out and bet ace king. Maybe he slow plays it, but with the flush draw out there, I'm not too worried. So when he checks back, I'm feeling pretty good that I have the best hand. And the turn is now the king of clubs.
Well, one thing on that too, I mean, he could have a queen, right? Like he could have like ace queen, queen jack, something like that. Another thing too is that if I was playing in this game where I didn't think that the three betting was really all that light, I mean, coming in for a 3x open at 1-3 with 400 effective, and then the small blind three bets me, I think ace king off heads up from under the gun it is probably called more than it is four bet, because I don't like to turn that hand necessarily into a bluff, and it kind of feels like I'm hating life if I get five bet jammed in these small games with ace king off. So it goes check check. I agree with what you're saying about the flop. Turns now a king, so it's obviously less likely that he has a king, and you probably do have the best hand now.
Yes, I think it's a great turn for me because not only do I think he thinks I'm betting a king there, I think he's betting a king on the flop. So when the king peels in the turn, I think this is great because now I'm very confident I have the best hand, and he's not going to believe that I have a king. So I come out and bet 60 for value.
Okay.
And he ends up calling.
So hero bet 60, and UTG calls. I mean, interesting about the sizing. I kind of wanted to take like, sometimes though in these small stakes games, when I say I want to take like 1/3, it ends up being kind of like half because the same range kind of calls. What you want to get called by like the ace highs, like ace jack, ace 10 in pairs, I would say. Like if he's got jacks, tens. So it's just interesting to note that when the small blind three bets, checks a king queen four flop, and then bets a king turn, how often are people continuing to hold on with like nines, jacks, things like that? I suppose, like I said, if you keep your sizing in check, I suppose that you could get called by that. All right, so we're at 230 now, right? 230 to the river.
Yep.
Okay.
And the river peels off the 2 of diamonds, so the flush ends up getting there.
So the front door flush draw gets there. It's king of diamonds, queen of diamonds, 4 spades, turns the king of clubs. The river here is the deuce of diamonds. Now, it sounds to me like you aren't really all that concerned about the flush draw because you think that this guy would probably be, what you'd say, like probably betting out with a lot of his flush draws on the flop.
Yeah, definitely. Like, first instinct, I'm not worried about him having a flush at all.
By the way, what's also interesting about the flop distribution of these diamonds, it's king of diamonds, queen of diamonds, 4 spades. So what that means is if he's opening a reasonable range and defending from UTG, for the most part, all of his diamond draws are nut flush draws, or it's like a mega combo draw, which jack 10 of diamonds would be like a royal flush draw, or jack 9 of diamonds would be a combo draw. I mean, maybe once in a while he squeaks in with a suited connector, but I kind of tend to agree with you because of the way that the flop is sort of laid out, where most diamond draws are fairly big types of draws, that there would be a good portion of the time that he would bet diamond draws. Now, if you had a hand like ace 5 of diamonds, now ace 4 of diamonds is also a combo draw. I mean, maybe sometimes those are checked back, but for the most part, I see a lot of people at this low stakes just bet those off for the most part. So I would tend to agree with you that diamonds are fairly unlikely. And I guess the question now for you is, what are you trying to extract from here?
Yeah, I agree with everything you just said. I think a lot of his flush draws are betting off, especially, his ace jack of diamonds, ace 10 of diamonds, those types of hands have a great equity on the flop. So, like I said, I'm not really worried about him. I think for a little bit, and I'm like, should I go really small here? Maybe bet 80, 90, something like that, and get a crying call from, a non-believing pocket pair like sevens through jacks. Or can I go very large and, kind of look like I'm trying to steal this thing? But like I said, I'm very confident, I'm ahead and I have the best hand with my queen. So I think for a little bit, and I elect with the ladder and I jam, which, is going to put his whole stack at risk to call.
You jam for how much?
I'm covering him, so it's about 280 there's about 230 in the pot, and he probably has about 280 behind, something like that.
So you jam here. What did you say the river was again?
Deuce of diamonds.
So here's the thing, Liam. So in your email, you said 4 of diamonds. And I think that's a big difference, by the way. I had to look back. I just looked back at the email. Is it deuce of diamonds or 4 of diamonds?
It's deuce of diamonds. Didn't pair the board.
Because the thing about 4 of diamonds here as opposed to deuce of diamonds is that, like, I could see going super thin with the 4 of diamonds here because you might get called by ace high on a double paired board. Like if it was king, queen, 4, king, 4, I could see sometimes making a play. I don't know about all in, but I could see making like a larger bet. Now that it's the deuce of diamonds, like to move all in here, unless you are trying to move him, it doesn't sound to me like it sounds to me like you're trying to depolarize here for value, right? You're not trying to bluff a worse queen, a better queen off the hand, right? That's not what your intention is, right?
No, not at all. This is totally for value. I think I'm just so confident my queen's ahead, and I don't think, like I said, I don't think he believes I have a king, which I don't, and I don't think he thinks I have a flush either. So, but I think I'm ahead with my queen, so I go ahead and jam.
But I mean, do you have some sort of history with this guy?
Like I said, I was playing with him for maybe an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, and I was like open-ended on a flop where I check raised him in a hand before and did a little barreling and ended up shutting down, and I wasn't good. So I think, like I said, I had a inkling that he might have thought I was an aggressive player.
I want to bring up something here. Jack McHann says, I've played with this kid Liam at Encore. He's a nit.
I don't know
Now,
who that is, but
now,
hey, that's good for me then. I guess.
now, if you have a nitty image,
Yeah.
I would say this is way of an overplay. Now, maybe that guy isn't necessarily telling the truth, but
I hope I have a nitty image. That's
I mean,
cool.
but the problem, yeah, but here's the thing though. Let's say you do here's the thing. Let's say you're really not a nit. This is where it goes down to like what I talk about, how my strategy for showing hands and stuff. Let's say you're really not a nit, but people don't know that, right?
Yeah.
And you do have a nitty image. So let's say you are perceived to have a nitty image. What is the adjustment you should make if you're perceived to have a nitty image?
Oh, I bet small here. If I.
Well, just in
thought I-
general. In
Oh
general.
yeah.
It's probably bluff
I-
bluff more often, right?
Yeah.
And then you actually have to rein in your thin value bets, because you're not going to get called as much. Now, again, I don't know if you have a nitty image or not, but if you did have a nitty image, or if people perceived you to have a nitty image, I would have a huge problem here with this bet, which is hero all in for 280 because of that factor. And I think it's a little bit optimistic to think that somebody's going to call you down with like ace high, jacks, or tens here, because like, I mean, are you delayed c betting like a total whiff? Like, you remember, it's a really tight configuration. I mean, the only types of hands that make a whole lot of sense here would be like a complete whiff that you had given up with on the flop, like 5-6 of clubs. And then when he didn't bet the flop, you decided to delay it, and then you just went for it. But it's such a tight configuration. I just don't know if you're doing this with like ace jack, ace 10, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense for a lot of other hands either. Like, unless you're turning like some small pair here into a bluff. So I do think your hand is a little bit in between. If you had like, again, like it's almost like you're trying to bluff a better queen off the hand. Like if you had something like ace queen here, and again, the problem here too with you having a queen, well, if you had ace queen, the problem would be that like he has less queens because you have a queen. Here you have queen 10. It's the same problem. I'm just concerned that he might have I don't know, maybe you accidentally win the hand because he folds out a queen, although I don't know if he's going to fold out a queen here. That's why the way that this one's played, so I kind of like a little ace queen a little bit better. But what ended up happening?
Definitely. I just want to add one thing. I opened up the comments, and it looks like that was Jake that said that. That's my good buddy I play with, who called me a nit. And we don't have to trail off too hard on it, but he was a caller. You probably called with him maybe a year or two ago about the counterfeit chips, and at Encore.
Okay.
And he called in, and I was the buddy that swapped the counterfeit chips to him, which I had no idea about.
Okay.
So yeah, that's just a little backstory on
Okay.
that. So that was just a light jab. So that was funny, because when you said Jack, I was like, I don't know who Jack is, but then I looked at the comments and it was Jake. So that's a good one. But anyways, so sorry. So he ends up thinking about this for about a minute or two, and he ends up calling, and I flip over my hand, pretty quickly, because I was rooting for the call. My intuition told me I was good, and I might be able to look like I'm trying to steal this thing by overbetting the pot here. And he looks pretty dumbfounded to see what I have, and he says, wow, nice bet. And he mucks.
Well, we never really want to be overly results oriented.
Definitely.
Yeah,
that's why I wanted to call in.
I just think that this is, again, it goes back to being a very, very tight configuration pre-flop. I personally would have just bet smaller here at the end. And sometimes when you depolarize, like you get like these weird hero calls, which sometimes allows us to, obviously value bet slightly lighter. But like if you had aces here, I would love the line, especially unblocking a queen. With like queen 10 here, I don't know. I mean, like, what about like if you had, so would you take the same line with jacks?
That's a great question. Um,
I mean, the only difference would be he could have more queen X, right? Because you don't have it,
yeah, exactly. I think I'm unblocking because I mean,
and
I
he
really
can't have
wasn't worried
jacks.
about. I was kind of ruling him. I was ruling out him having a queen as well, just since I'm, have removal to that. So with jacks, I don't. I want to say I'm not taking the same line. I put a lot of emphasis on myself having a queen with the blocker there. So I was kind of rolling out his, queen, jack, ace, queen type hands. I was targeting, his sevens through jacks and was just hoping for a hero call from him, just thinking I'm trying to steal this thing. And yeah, like I said, you can't be, or like you said, you can't be results oriented, and that's the reason I wanted to call in because I was thinking about it after. I'm like, was I going way too thin there? Was that a play where I'm, a good play to try to get max value? Is it,
I mean, personally, like I said, I think it's a little bit too thin. I think the conversation about how your image is perceived to works into this. But thank you very much for the call. I appreciate it.
Sweet. Thank you, Bart.
All right. The next caller here is supposed to be Robin, and I saw him in the. If anybody's trying to call in, the way that this show works is like you're put in a waiting room with Google Meet, and you can just sit there until I call on you. I saw the next caller. Oh, there it is. Okay, and then the next caller went away, but I think this is the next caller. All right, the next caller here is Robin. Hello, Robin. You are up next.
Hey, how's it going, Bart?
How's it going, Robin? Where are you played out of?
Yeah, this is from Casino Nova Scotia in Halifax.
Oh, I don't know if we've ever had a call from Casino, Nova Scotia.
It's a pretty small community.
Casino, Nova Scotia.
Yeah.
Robin, I'm thinking about going to the finals on Thursday in the nations, where the Four Nations face off, where the U.S. handed Canada their ass in Montreal. The other day, I don't know. The tickets are pretty expensive. Anytime I think of Canadian, I think of a big hockey fan.
Yeah,
so.
I have a few poker friends that are there for all four or all the games.
Oh,
so
wow.
I'm out there. Yeah.
Nice. All right. So what game are you playing?
Yeah. So this is 2-5. We're 9-handed.
Okay.
And we're about 1,300 effective.
What's the structure in this game?
It's 2-5, $9 rake.
Like, is there max buy-in? I mean.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's 500.
Oh, it's a 500, and you're up to and you're 1,300 effective. Obviously, I mean that makes a big difference too with the background, right? I mean, I think there's a huge difference between like where I came from, like the games in LA with the $5 500 versus like, oh well, if it's a 2-5, it's a 1K cap, you're at 13. But here you're whoever you're playing with, you guys are both like 2.5 extra stack.
Yeah, I mean the game has a lot of the same players over and over.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's just important to try to get deep, like as quickly as possible.
Right.
Just because with the 500, there's not really that much room to make money. But once you get deeper, the mistakes get more expensive for the players that you're playing against. So yeah, I try to get as deep as possible quickly as I can.
So I got to ask you a question because there's a reason why, because it's going to play into the next call. So in a restricted buying game like this, do you guys ever see people going north, or are there people that are habitually like bringing more than the cap over? And how is that handled at your casino?
The dealers are pretty strict.
Okay.
Yeah, so it rarely happens.
Okay.
They may be over by a couple bucks when they come over from like maybe a 1-3 table or something, but the dealers are pretty strict, so it's pretty rare.
Okay. So 2-5 9-handed 1,300 effective. Okay.
Yeah. So I'm middle position. I think I'm just like low jack or one before with ace of hearts, queen of clubs,
All right.
and I open at 20.
So here on the low jack, ace of hearts, queen of clubs opens to 20. That's about the standard open size?
Yeah, I go like if there's limpers in between, then I'll go higher, like by either $5 or $10, depending on who's limping.
Mm-hmm.
But 20 is pretty standard. Yeah.
Okay.
And only the button calls.
So the button only calls. Okay.
Yep.
So your head's up. And the pot's like what, 45 or something like that?
Yeah, 47, I guess, with the small blind, but
We'll call
that's
it we'll call it
that's
45 because of the rake. Okay.
yeah. So the flop is queen of diamonds, three of diamonds, three of hearts.
Queen of diamonds, three of diamonds, three of hearts. Hero with ace of hearts, queen of clubs.
Yeah.
So you
flop.
flop top.
Top. Yeah.
Okay.
Pretty good flop. I sometimes check these boards just to kind of disguise the strength of my hand. And also, I'm just really not afraid of much.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes I'd like to give the opponent a chance to catch up with hands like King Jack or Jack 10 or Ace Jack that are just going to just fold to a bet.
Well,
and there's really no bad turn card.
I mean, your hand doesn't, right, your hand doesn't really need a whole lot of protection. One of the things I would look at here is like think about, well, what is a button flat call type of range here? Is it, a lot of times it might be pairs, which you might be able to get value from now anyways. Whether any, deuces through like eights or something like that. The other thing, sometimes you can get called here by ace highs as well. You have an ace in your hand, so it's slightly less likely. And then what are the other hands that people call with here on the button? It would be what, like suited connectors,
right?
Some Broadway suited types of holdings, things like that. I don't know. Every time I like default thinking that I want to check, I just bet small. I mean, I don't think it's terrible, but I just think that you could still bet like 15 here or something like that. Like the reason for checking would be so that he would stab at it with a hand that he would just otherwise fold to a small bet, which isn't all that common. I would say necessarily. I mean, that's how I would feel about looking at whether I was going to bet or check here.
Yeah, I don't always check. I think multi-way, it's 100% a bet. It's just sometimes I like to mix it up. I play with the same players all the time, so sometimes it's just nice to just I don't know, have a little bit of balance, I guess. But yeah, I would be betting this board most of the time. I just decided this time to check.
So you did check.
Yeah, I checked and he checked back.
Okay. So hero checks, button checks.
Yeah.
Behind. Now, if he had bet, are you just calling?
I guess it would depend on his size. If he bet like maybe super small, I would probably raise. And then if he bet bigger, I would just call.
Now, the interesting thing about that part is that if you just a little bit something subtle, like I said, I don't take this line all that often, but I would rather check raise aces or kings here than ace queen. Just because if you have ace queen, there's just more of a chance that he doesn't have a queen. So, and you can make your hand look like you've got ace high and you're check calling. So, I mean, I don't think it would be terrible to start a check raise, but I would say, when I like to do that on the flop as the pre-flop raiser when I unblock top pair, whether that's over pairs, whether that's flopping like middle set, things like that. But okay, so you check and the button checks behind. Okay.
Yep. So the turn is the 10 of hearts.
10 of hearts. So it's queen of diamonds, 3 of diamonds, 3 of hearts, 10 of hearts. It puts a backdoor heart draw out there. Front door diamonds, backdoor hearts. Hero has the ace of hearts. Okay.
It's like a super wet turn. Like it brings in so many draws that he can have now. So I bet pretty close to pot. I think I could have even went bigger, but I bet 35.
All right. So hero.
I probably could have just gone full pot.
Yeah, I actually like, if I checked, I probably would just bet full pot here.
Yeah.
And the thing is that like you can credibly say like, well, you're now betting ace king, ace jack, or something like two Broadway types of holdings. And like whether it's 35 or 45, I think he might be just still calling with the same range. Like, I don't know if you're getting the action from like sixes here anyways. So, I mean, it's close, but I would probably just, lean towards betting like 40 or 45. But okay, you bet 35.
Yeah, and he just calls.
All right, so the button calls. So he checks back the flop. You bet 35 on the turn, and he calls on queen 3-3, 10 with 2 flush draws now, and the pot's $115. Okay.
Yeah. So the river's the jack of hearts.
The jack of hearts. So
yeah.
Queen 3-3, 10 jack, and now backdoor hearts come in. However, you have the ace of hearts in your hand, which feels to me like it makes it much easier to bet here. I feel like, remember, you're beating jack 10, right? Like if he like ran into jack 10, you're winning. It's queen 3-3, jack 10.
Yeah.
Now you're losing to queen 10 and queen jack, but there was no bet on the flop. Now, could he have like queen 10. Excuse me, queen jack once in a while. I guess
Definitely.
so. I guess so. If he
Yeah.
if he wasn't calling raises with queen jack offsuit, you look back at the suit of your queen and you realize that with the queen of clubs in your hand, the queen of diamonds, and the jack of hearts on board, there's actually only one combo of
Exactly.
queen jack suited. The thing that I'm looking at though is that I think it makes it a lot easier for you here, especially on this flush distribution, to bet with the ace of hearts, because what are the possible backdoor heart holdings that he can have? He can't have ace x of hearts because you have it. We would probably say that it's unlikely that he had like queen x of hearts, which would be what? Just king queen of hearts. He didn't bet the flop. There was no 3-bet
Right.
pre. Queen 9 of hearts, if it went down that far. I mean, again, like it's just like one of these once in a while types of things. So, I mean, in reality, when you take those things out, now you're just like looking at, just sort of what? Suited connecting types of holdings,
Yeah,
like 7,
9, 8,
6 of
7,
hearts or
6.
something.
Right. Right.
So I mean, I think it makes it the way that you played this one, I think it makes it a pretty easy or bet with the ace of hearts in tow, like in your hand here.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking on the river. I think I can still get called by, like you said, Jack 10, even sometimes like, they can get, if I bet small enough, I can get called by like King Jack or Ace Jack that had a gut shot on the turn or an open ender on the turn that now paired up on the river. Like if they really truly don't believe me and they, if I bet small enough, then they're getting a pretty good price.
So I just got to point something out, and I don't mean to pick on these guys, personally, individually, but there's a couple of guys chiming in here. Obi says check call at the end.
Check
Paul
call.
T,
Yeah, that's so weak.
Paul T says check call. Why on earth would you ever check call? You guys know, if you've been with me for a long time, that at the smaller stakes of like Live No Limit, check calling on the river in general is I think is a pretty bad play. And again, the reasons to check call, there's two specific reasons to check call. Number one, you're trying to induce a bluff, right? So, you're checking because if you were to bet for value, the guy's just going to fold.
Right.
And number two, it would be to get a guy to value own himself. And that would be that he's going to bet a hand at the end that he would otherwise fold to a bet.
Right.
That's just never first of all, what is the guy bluffing with? King, Jack, and Jack 9, which are straight draws on the turn on Queen, Queen 3, 10.
Check the river.
They pair up at the end, right?
Yeah.
King, Jack, and Jack 9 pair. So what hand is a guy now betting here that's a bluff where we're going to check call?
Yeah, and they would love to check back. I mean, if they get to the river with King Jack, then pair up and see me check, they would love to check because they probably think they win.
And the other thing too is that you look at, well, what about like Queen Jack? Would Queen Jack bet? I mean, Queen Jack probably should bet, but Queen Jack is definitely calling for sure. So why give the guy a chance to check back Queen Jack and think that, you're like checking Ace King here? You know what I mean? Like it's a 2-5 game. So I just cannot think of, how possibly checking here on the river would be the play.
For sure.
Right.
You don't have to go for big, but you have to at least go for thin value.
Now there are times when I say check the river and like you could check fold. This is not one of those times.
No.
But again, of course, having the ace of hearts in your hand, I just think it's a very easy bet. But okay.
Yeah. So I do a little bit of like a block bet. Like I just try to bet small enough to try to, again, get called by like Jack 10, King Jack, Ace Jack. If he ever has like Queen 9 ever that he did check back the flop with. So I bet 45 into like 115.
So you're trying to get called by a Jack or a 10, right? Like if he calls turn, he might have a 10, river. I mean, it's sort of not the best card for you in the deck to get like a whole lot of value from because of the fact that Ace King now beats all those hands. So I kind of like small for sure. So hero bets 45. Okay.
Do you like that size? Would you go even smaller?
I might go a little bit. 45 and a 115. I mean, at this point, the pot's small enough where it's kind of. I think it's fine. 35 to 45. But I do think that with your specific combo and what has happened with this action, a small bet is in order for sure.
Yeah. So now it gets interesting. He actually raises to 175.
So the button now raises
175. Yeah.
Button raises to 175. That's kind of, I
So
mean, it's weird in the sense that, like I said, I talked about how there weren't going to be many backdoor flushes here represented if we think king, queen of hearts is going to be like either 3-bet or bet off on the flop. If you think most queen X is betting, throw out queen 9. So that's like a suited connector that backed into hearts. Could he also have like pocket 10s and pocket jacks here that wasn't necessarily 3-bet, or are those
yeah,
hand
so a
mostly
little
3-betting?
history from this guy, like 100% free betting tens or jacks pre, like especially against me. I'm considered a little bit more of like an aggressive player in the game. So I don't think there might be, sometimes he might flat tens if he was like on his phone and didn't pay attention or something, but he's 100% three betting, in my opinion, all of the pairs pre. And I think if he ends up with the river here with like, let's say 7-6 of hearts or 9-8 of hearts or 8-7 of hearts, like he probably would raise the river facing 45. I mean, I probably would as well. Right?
So Obi says, you see, because I was the one who called him out saying, like, don't check call. Yeah, but the whole point of this is that the caller is betting for value because he wants to get called by worse. And now this seems like it's never a bluff here. So
I don't think he's bluffing ever.
So it's just a bet fold. Now I can see maybe where this is going here because of the fact that you've got a queen in your hand and you have the ace of hearts in the hand. So before we get to the whole discussion of whether I feel maybe this is going where you're considering doing something here with like a bet 3-bet at the end, the idea of this is it would just be a bet fold.
For sure.
Right?
For
like
sure.
he's not bluffing. And ace queen is not good enough to call, right? Do we agree with that?
Yeah, I agree for sure.
Okay. Because we're just not seeing a guy really do this with, like I said, it would be so infrequent. There would have to be so many things that would have to happen for him to raise with like something for worse would be queen jack. He would have to not bet the flop. He'd have to be like playing the offsuit queen jacks. And then he remember, he's losing to ace king. You check the flop, bet the turn, and now you're betting the river. Who is raising queen jack here at the end? And it's not like you went stupid small. The backdoor hearts came in and ace king came in. So we can really logically say that he's never really raising anything worse for value, I feel like, here at the end.
Definitely not.
Yeah.
And in the moment, I didn't feel like it was a bluff. And it was one of those spots where I knew I was going for thin value. And then if I got raised, I had already kind of decided what I was going to do with my hand. Because when the river came to jack of hearts, like I just feel like I have all the boats here. Like if I flopped queens full, I probably would check.
Here's the thing that concerns me, though. I mean, here's the thing that concerns me. Again, yes. If you saw his hand and it was like 6-7 of hearts, we could have a discussion. Well, I was going to say we could have a discussion about whether you think that it might be profitable to bet 3-bet the river. What I'm concerned about is if he has like 10-10 or jack-jack, but I just remember that you just said that you think he's always 3-betting those hands. Because what would concern me here in real time would be, what about the boats that you're just never getting to fold ever here in the form of like 10-10 or jack-jack? And then, of course, there's like one like quad threes type of holding. So you're looking at like, well, I maybe can get him off a small flush, but I look at this and I'm like, yeah, but what about some of these other hands that are never, ever folding? But I think what you're saying is you just never think he's got like jacks or 10s ever.
Yeah, I don't think they're, especially from what I know from this guy and how much I've played with him, like he would just always three. Like if the flop was like queen 9-9, this would be a different discussion. Because now all the two pairs are now boats, right? Like 10-9, jack-9, queen 9.
Right.
But queen 3-3, there's really no two pairs that are now boats.
People saying I'm calling. I don't think I think calling's the worst.
Calling is terrible. Yeah, that's probably the worst.
Yeah, calling I think is the worst option. That's the worst. But again, I mean, I suppose I don't know, man. Like, I know. I mean, I haven't watched as much. One of the things I want to do, I've told myself, because I've heard the videos are really good, is Mark Goon's Hungry Horse stuff. Because he takes a different approach, and he's a really good player. He's a friend of mine, and I know that he's like really, really experimenting around with, moving people off of hands as, running big bluffs. I don't know if some of this stuff where he's talking about like 3-betting rivers, if it went that far. I just can tell you in my experience, it's just hard to move people off of hands that they sort of perceive to be strong. Now, with that being said, your logic, if you think he never has tens and jacks here, and you've got the ace of hearts and you have a queen, then it's probably one of the best candidates that you could make this play if you were trying to, say, like fold them off of, I suppose, like a small flush. I mean, that's what you're trying to do, right? Fold them off a small flush.
Yeah, and my thought process was as well. I mean, it would be logical for like, would you raise the nut flush here? Would you 3-bet the nut flush here in the river, having played the way it played?
So
No 3-bet.
So if you had,
Because I most likely would.
well, I think it would depend. Actually, you know what? I think I would not want to have like ace queen of hearts here. So say you had like ace five of hearts and you didn't see bet the flop. So I would want to not have ace queen of hearts. So it really depends on, and I would not want to obviously have a king. I would not want to have ace king of hearts. So
Right.
it depends on what you would want to have ace little of hearts. I feel like to 3-bet at the end. I mean, if you come to this, if you have, if you had ace four of hearts here and you played it this way, and you're telling me, Robin, that the guy never has jacks and tens here, never, and never has queens because he 3-bet you pre, how can you not 3-bet the nut flush? You're only losing to pocket
That's
threes.
what I was thinking in the moment. I was like, if I had the nut flush here, I probably would re-raise. Like the only combo I give him is like maybe once in a while he has tens. Maybe once in a while he just flatted the button with tens.
Well, I mean, if you had ace king of hearts here and you thought that he was always going to be betting off queen X on the flop, then you're blocking a lot of the hearts that he can have here. So it might start skewing him to having other hands besides flushes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's
true.
why I think it depends on what you have in your hand. So hero bets 45, button raised to 175. If you were going to go for it, I suppose, I mean, now we get into this whole like live discussion of, well, theoretically, and the thing that makes sense in math is like, if you want to give him the worst price, right? You want to jam all in. So he's getting the worst price. The sort of, again, live paradox of live poker is sometimes that will get called at the same frequency, if not more, than making it like a 3-bet value size that your opponent thinks that they would do with like pocket queens or pocket jacks, like 3-betting it to like 850 or something like that. You know what I mean?
Yeah. He made it 175 and I made it 600.
Oh, so you did go smaller. Wow.
Yeah, because I was thinking I would not go. I mean, all in seems like that's because it's so much more. I mean, we're 1,300 effective to go from 175 to like, I mean, what would it be? 175.
I mean, we're splitting hairs here. I mean,
yeah.
So I can, for the same reasons I just said, I can get on board with a smaller bet than all in. I feel like you might have made it too small though. I mean, you go to 600.
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, I think you should go to like 900 or something like that.
Just because you think he's never folding?
I just think he's at 600. He might just talk himself into calling for 425 more. Where you go make it 900, he gets worse of a price. It's more money. And then again, like I said, sure, you could move all in, but the paradox of live poker, sometimes people would be like, what?
Yeah.
Although in this particular spot, though, like when he's raising on the backdoor side, I could see just moving all in anyways if you actually had like a boat. You know, as if you had like tens or jacks or something, say you bet the turn with jacks and then you bet at the end and then you raised. If I think someone's got a flush here and you're unblocking all like the nut flush combos, I might just jam thinking that the guy's never going to fold. Hero 3-bets to 600. Okay.
Yeah, the reason I went to 600 was just because it's such a rare spot. I mean, to see a 3-bet on the river is like, it's pretty unlikely. You don't see it very often. And so I just said in my own head, like, when am I ever bluffing here? And if I am never bluffing and I have a lot of value, like what size would I go for value? And 600 is probably the size I would go because I think all in, I mean, like, I don't see what he would like. I feel like I'm only getting called by quads.
Yeah, but you're over. I just think you're starting to overthink things a little bit, though. I think you're starting to overthink things a little bit. So you're trying to like be balanced with like what you would actually do with your value in terms.
That was my thought process. Yeah.
So you 3-bet to 600 and.
Yeah, he tank folds. never got a reveal. He kind of just said, all right, and just folded after a couple of minutes. So I'm assuming it
couple
might have
minutes
been,
are a long time.
yeah, it was like maybe 1.5, 2 minutes, something like that. Like he thought about it for quite a while. And then he just said, yeah, all right, and folded. I never got a reveal, unfortunately.
I mean, this is kind of like what I like this hand, even though we didn't get a reveal. I always say that sometimes poker, like reading a hand, is like a conditional logic problem. If people ever took like philosophy, this could be even like philosophy 101 or 102. So what we're doing is we're doing like what if, or if then. I think is it what if or if then statements. And the interesting thing here is that if you buy into the if then, if I give you these conditional statements that Jack is 3-bet pre-flop 100%, 10-10 is pre-flop 100%, Queen X is bet on the flop 100%. So if you plug that in, now that might not be the reality, but I'm just saying, if you plug that into this hand, you can see why 3-betting with ace queen with the ace of hearts would be the play. Because he really just can't have any high flush here at all, because you have the ace of hearts, and he can't have queen X of hearts because he didn't bet the flop. So what is he calling with king 9 of hearts? And then, so he's just left with small flushes. And if he's always folding those, then that's the line of sort of conditional if-then types of things moving through this hand. But I appreciate the call. Thank you very much, Robin.
No problem. Thanks.
All right, let's move along here. All right, so this is the non-hand call. And this is a good one, by the way, here too. I talked about how, I'm just going to pull myself out, and I'm trying to guide you guys through this, because this might play into some tournament stuff here at the World Series. I'm going to pull out my phone because I was just going back and forth with my friend Alan in Texas, the floor guy at TCH. Jacob, you are up next, sir.
Hey, Bart. How's it going?
How's it going, Jacob? So you have a non-hand call, but it's more of a mechanic. It's not anything like with like something crazy happen, but just kind of something that we'd probably see in a fair, if you play a lot of PLO in pot limit games where there is a limit to the amount that you can bet on a straight, you have probably seen this. The hand itself, like the exact hand itself, probably isn't all that important, but you can guide us through. So this is a double board PLO bomb pot, is that right?
Yeah, correct. It's in a 2-5 hold'em game with a 1K cap, 7 ways to a flop. Yes.
Okay. So you can just sort of tell us what happens. I'm not even going to put it up because the cards don't really make any difference. So if you can just summarize, like what, 2 guys, like one sort of whale and a pro get to, they get to the turn? Is that right? In their heads up?
Yeah. So how it kind of goes is, there's the big action guy in middle position, basically bets pot on a flop, and a button, who I think is a PLO reg actually.
Okay.
He calls.
Yep.
And so it goes to the turn, and basically, right when the turn comes out, the VIP instantly says all in. And a little backstory here, unfortunately, the dealer, it was his first day dealing at all, so I don't think it helped out the situation. So when he says all in, the pot's 525, but he has about 1,200 behind.
Okay, so the pot is 525 moving to the turn.
Yes.
So obviously he can only bet 525. The VIP says all in.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. So then what happens?
Yep. And the dealer puts the all-in button in front of him.
Okay.
And the PLO player on the button just instantly flicks in the 1-chip call.
So he says all in. Dealer puts the all-in chip in front of him. The PLO reg flips in the one chip call. Okay. And then what happens?
And so at the table, there's kind of a brief discussion for maybe 10, 15 seconds because someone said, hey, the pot's not as much as your stack.
Before the river came out?
Yes, before the river comes out. Yes.
So somebody chimes in and says, I don't know if that's right because he might have bet more than pot.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. And the VIP's just saying, kind of, I bet it all. I want to go all in. And the PLO guy is just kind of nodding, saying, yeah, sure, I call, which I've seen this before, but it's usually, if there's like 300 in the pot and somebody has 400 and pushes all in,
right? They
just kind of agree that, sure, we'll go all in.
Okay.
And so Yep. After the PLO guy kind of says, yeah, sure, I call, the dealer doesn't sort in the pot, I'll say. He just leaves the chips where they are. So they're still in front of each player,
Mhm.
and he deals the river cards.
Okay. He deals the river card. Yep.
Yep. And so basically on the top board, the VIP had it locked up, but on the bottom board, the board pairs and he makes 2 boats and he instantly tables his hand.
So the VIP wins both boards
Yes.
in this double board game.
Yep. He flips his hand up. The PLO reg's kind of looking at it, kind of grumbling, saying, oh, I had the nuts straight on the bottom, but you rivered me.
Yep.
And he's looking at his cards and he doesn't muck. He just puts them down in front of him
Mhm.
and says, okay, how much do I owe, as the dealer goes to take his stack.
Mhm.
And so at this point, the VIP is kind of saying, oh, I have you covered, which he does. And
Right.
so he gets it all.
Yep.
And then the PLO guy says, whoa, hold on now. I only owe what's in the pot.
So this guy said all in on the turn. The dealer actually put the all in button in, which he shouldn't have said. The other
Correct.
guy said, okay, whatever, I call. I think this is very important. And then on the river, there is no discussion about any types of betting on the river, right? Did they just
No.
they just turn their hands over on the river, right?
Yep, the VIP turns his hand over. The PLO guy never
Yep.
actually turns his hand over. He looks at it and just puts it down in front of him, face down still, but does not muck it.
Yep. And now what happens?
And so now they're kind of getting into a disagreement because the VIP is saying, hey, no, I get all the chips. You called me.
Yep.
And the PLO guy's saying, no, you bet more than the pot. That can't happen.
Mhm.
And so they have to call the floor over.
Okay. And what does the floor say?
And so the floor, we kind of described the action to him. It takes a couple minutes, but the ultimate ruling is that you can only bet what's in the pot.
Okay.
So he takes 525 from each player.
Uh-huh.
He takes the 2 river cards and shuffles them back into the deck.
What?
has the
Wait a
dealer-
minute. Wait.
Yep.
He brought the action back to the turn for a bet that was over the size of the pot?
Yes, the ruling was that you can only bet the amount of the pot, and since there's still money left, there's still action,
Oh my
and therefore we
God.
have to redo the river.
Oh, first of all, that's the most insane, one of the more insane rulings I've ever heard. You would think that maybe the floor would rule that it's only the bet of 525 that is
Mhm.
legal, and then the VIP guy wins both boards. But to bring the action back and then reshuffle the cards in and start the hand again from the turn is absolutely insane. So when they did that, when they brought it back to the turn, then what? The guy bet 525, and then what happened after that?
Yeah, so basically the floor is standing there, and he's making sure everything goes, according to his ruling. So they take in the 525 from each player, has the dealer take the rivers, shuffle them back into the deck, and says, okay, guys, so you'll still have the round of river betting. So dealer, please deal out the rivers. He puts down 2 new rivers. And then, the guys are just kind of looking at each other. The VIP's still in shock, how did you just do that?
Wow.
And so he just checks. And
Uh-huh.
the PLO guy, I think, kind of stunned, checks himself. And then the bottom board actually bricked out to where the PLO guy with his straight wins the bottom board now.
So they bring it back to the turn. The 525 is already in, forced to be put in the call. And now there's action on the river. It goes check, check, and now they chop it up, right? Because there's different rivers, right? So they chop it
Correct.
up and they chop it. Well,
Yep.
I've never heard of anything like that for that resolution. I knew that was not something that was totally standard. And I think we can all agree with that. But I did want to discuss with Alan the Floorman, now he's a character on the show, what I deem to be accepted action. And I saw somebody writing this in the live chat. And again, this is where I was going to talk about WSOP tournaments. So he says, in pot limit games, if action can be corrected on that street, it should be. Given the context of this conversation and that no one stopped either side, if I got called to the table, I'm ruling it that it is all in as accepted action. This is backed up by the TDA, that there is such a thing as accepted action. He goes on to say, I have no idea what was going on when taking the river cards back. That's just crazy. But accepted action is something that is certainly in the TDA. And where this comes into play with the TDA, and then I'm going to tell you a small anecdote at the end where I saw a huge angle like 20 years ago when I was doing commentary on Live at the Bike is, and I saw Daniel Negreanu tweeting about this a while back, maybe a month or two back. You'll see these guys now, when they're like moving all in a tournament, move their entire stack in except for one chip. So they'll go all in and they'll leave one chip behind. And now, if you can picture this, the person in the blind or whoever is about to call them says call. And you might even have the dealer even throw in the all-in button. But the guy has put all his chips in but one chip. So let's say that happens. And somebody calls thinking that the guy's all in. And now the player who moved all in minus one chip loses. And now says, oh, I still have one chip. There is a rule with the TDA that says that chip, that one chip behind, can be deemed as accepted action if A bets all in and a hidden chip is found behind after a player calls. The TD will determine if the chip behind is a part of accepted action. I don't know when they put that rule in, but that is to prevent this. And the whole thing that Negreanu was saying in the whole conversation was, you pros, you guys are doing this. You guys are moving all your chips in except for one chip so that somebody makes like a mechanical mistake and says call and then like accidentally reveals their hand. And then you get to just fold out to save one chip. That's the whole point of why someone is doing this. So there is a rule called accepted action. I think it's a good rule. It should be a rule in cash games. I think it fits into exactly what you're talking about here in this particular situation. Because what ends up happening is the VIP gets free rolled against. I'll tell you something that I saw that was absolutely insane about 20 years ago. This was in No Limit. If people remember Corporation Mike from way back in the day, he was playing a pot against a guy. I think the guy was a plastic surgeon. This was probably back in 2006, okay? So they have, there's action on the flop. They have a big flop, and they get it all in, quote unquote, okay? Now, at that time, there was no all-in buttons. So player A, he like makes a bet, and then I think I think player A made a bet. Let's say the stacks were like 6,000 effective. Player A made a bet of like 5,000, and Mike put the 5,000 in thinking that it was all in. If you can kind of picture that, everyone thought that they were both all in. I don't know if it was bet or raise or whatever, but everybody thought they were both all in. When in fact, player A had only really bet 5,000 or he'd only put 5,000 in the middle as the bet. Mike calls the 5,000. This is on the flop. Now they have a discussion about whether or not they want to run it more than once. They decide to run it twice. Okay, so they run it twice. Now remember, you can only run it twice when you're both all in. They run it twice. They run 2 turns and 2 rivers with no betting action, and Mike wins both boards. And now player A says, well, I only owe you 5,000. I wasn't all in. You didn't put the extra 1,000 in. That is a great example of accepted action. No betting on turn and river, an action of running the board multiple times when the only time you can run the board multiple times is if you're all in. That's accepted action. Mike got burned by that guy for $1,000 because he assumed that everything was all in, and everything pointed to that also afterwards because there's no more betting. So you do have to protect yourself against this. And again, it's just something that looking at this situation, like in a tournament too, watch these guys that like try to put in like their entire stack and like leave one chip behind. I think the WSOP has all in buttons anyways, though, off the top of my head. But I think your situation here, Jacob, obviously the VIP guy he got fucked. I mean, where people are like, what did people think at the table?
I mean, everybody myself included, started to kind of chime in after, saying, man, that's really messed up. That's an awful thing to do. Even if you just give them the 525 plus the pot, whatever was in there. That's kind of the right thing to do to make it right. And which from an etiquette perspective, I was going to ask your opinion. I think that's the only way to do it right. Even if you're not going to give them your whole stack, like that's kind of the bare minimum.
So to do what?
So to put the 525 in that the PLO guy would
yeah,
owe
that's
for the pot.
the bare minimum. I mean,
Yeah.
he should be that's I mean, I wasn't even getting to how crazy that ruling was. I was just talking, I mean, the fact that, I mean, that's insane, the fact that they brought it back. Nate in the live chat says, why is the VIP always getting burned in these scenarios? Stop chasing away the money. I agree. There's one other thing of note that I want to bring up here too, that I also asked Alan, that I was talking to Robin, who was playing a restricted buy-in game in hand 2. When we talked about accepted action, I played in a fairly restricted buy-in game at Commerce, 500 to 1500, 510, no limit. There were people that were going north in that game all the time. What does north mean? North means they were coming over the table, or they table changed above what the cap was. At Commerce, at that time, I don't know if they've changed the rule, if you wanted to table change, not from a must move, but a table change, you had to bring your stack back down to the cap, because it's like you're moving to a new table. So if I had 5,000 over here and I wanted to table change, I had to bring it down to 1,500. Well, there were people that would start north of the cap or sneak chips onto the cap. And I always wondered about how that is supposed to be handled, because I've heard it handled many different ways. And I asked Alan, I said, what are your policies on someone going north in a cash game above the cap, and then when it's discovered in the middle of the hand? Is the fact that it was mentioned before the hand accepted action? The fact that it wasn't mentioned, before the hand accepted action. What I mean by that is that, let's say a guy goes north and then he plays a hand, like say he folds, and now in the next hand, he's north of the cap. And now all of a sudden it's discovered that this guy's got 2,500 instead of 1,500, and he gets all in. What is the resolution? And the majority of the time, what I have seen, and I don't know if there's a better way to really do this, is that if you don't bring it up before the hand that someone's above the cap, it is deemed as accepted action. You can't then go and say in the middle of the hand, this guy is above the cap. So there is precedent for this. But I thought the whole thing was kind of interesting. And again, I love the fact that floor men have this type of discretion, because I think that discretion, giving the floor men discretion, allows for someone to actually look at the individual situation and prevent angling. This resolution's insane that they brought it back to the turn and then dealt it out. I think that the VIP guy should really get all the money, right? Especially against a PLO reg. But I appreciate the call.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jacob.
Yep. Thanks, Bart.
All
Appreciate
right.
it.
Let me take a breath here. All right. We got 2 more calls here for today. Having looked at some of the comments in the live chat about this whole thing with accepted action. What happens if you catch a guy adding big chips mid-hand? Nate says, well, that's pretty bad. That's just fucking cheating, right? I mean, I saw guys try to take chips off of the table, middle of the hand, for sure. Rat hole in the middle of the hand. Let's go to Van, who's our next caller. Hello, Van. You're up next.
Hey, Bart. How you doing?
How's it going, Van? Where are you playing out of?
Playing 251K cap out of good old Parks Casino.
251K representing Michael G at the Parks. 251K at the Parks. Okay.
So we have King of Clubs, Jack of Clubs, and Under the Gun 1.
And how deep are you, by the way? What's the effective stacks?
1K effective.
All right, so 1K effective hero with King of Clubs, Jack of Clubs from +1. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Under the Gun, who's an OMC, raises 20.
Okay.
And we call.
So UTG to 20. Hero to the immediate left of the UTG. You say he's like an OMC type?
That's correct.
So hero flats with King Jack of Clubs from +1. Now, obviously, again, we always talk about that you're incentivized to 3-bet to drive the field out behind you, but there certainly are situations here, it's against a 4X open, where you might feel like you have a playable hand, but maybe it is not good enough necessarily to 3-bet. Did you ever consider folding?
No, folding's not an option. So yeah, the first inflection point is whether or not I should 3-bet. And at the time, I opted just to call because up until that hand, I had been 3-betting him a lot and getting him to fold. So I wanted to rein it back just a little.
Well, the interesting thing about, I mean, I understand what you're saying about that. And sometimes like I have that subconscious urge to, well, I've been raising a lot or 3-betting a lot. So now if I have like one that's cuspy, and what I mean is like, partials, say 50-50, well, now I'm just going to call because, I've been 3-betting a lot before. But if he's not going to 4-bet you, then it doesn't seem to really matter, right? You drive off the field anyways, and he's just going to call, and he's probably going to check to you blind on the flop.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I mean, you could certainly get into a situation where you don't want to 3-bet. The times that I will take cuspy hands and call with them is because I feel like the opponent might 4-bet me, and I don't want to get 4-bet necessarily with a playable hand. But okay, so you decide to call.
Yep. So then the button calls, and the button's going to be the main villain in this hand.
Okay.
Small blind calls, big blind calls, and we're 5-way to head into a flop with a pot of 100.
Good old live poker. By the way, how typical is it that it's going very, very multi-way in these games?
Pretty typical in single raise pots.
Yeah, which is, again, why. I mean, it is the reason that you are a little bit incentivized to 3-bet, but I mean, you can still play these hands multi-way. It's just you can't realize your equity, obviously, as well. I think a lot of times people get concerned they don't want to play multi-way because they don't know where they're at in their hand. Like they might think like, oh, I'm out kicked or something like that. I think it definitely is more to do with the fact that you just can't realize as well because you have to defend tight multi-way. So $100 to the flop and hero from +1 with king of clubs, jack of clubs. Okay.
Flop is jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 7 of clubs.
Jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 7 of clubs. So you flop top pair, right?
Yep.
Okay.
And it checks to the button who bets.
Wait. That's you when you washed over that very, very quickly, Van, by saying it got checked to the button. So UTG checks, right? Well, small blind and big blind check, right?
Yep.
UTG, the preflop raiser, checks, and now it's on you.
Yep.
And you have only one guy behind you, right?
Yep.
Just the button. So
just the button.
You decide to check?
I checked.
And why is that?
I don't know. It's probably a bad check.
I'm not saying that it's a bad check. It's just you washed over it very, very quickly. I mean, most of the time when you're talking about OMC types, now there can be exceptions, but most of the time, a lot of OMC types love to protect their hands. Now, could be one of those exceptions because it's super multi-way in the sense that like they play so few hands. They don't want to get like a bad beat with like aces or kings or queens. So they're going to bet the flop here on a jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 7 of clubs board a lot. If you believe with what I'm saying here, then that means they don't have those hands. Okay. So maybe it's a lot of high cards like ace, king, ace, queen. Now, obviously the small blind and the big blind are checking somewhat naturally, I'm sure, to the OMC person. But this board is pretty wet. There's a lot of draws out there. I actually kind of want to make protectionist vet / value bet anyways. And this is kind of like the great thing about like a typical 2-5 live game. Like if you got raised here on the flop by like somebody in the blinds, you can just mostly fold out without question. Now, if you're up against opponents that are sort of structuring their bluffs correctly and you don't want to bet fold, like you think your hand's too in between, like it's too strong to bet fold and you know that there is the chance because of board texture that you might get raised, then you're supposed to put that type of hand into like sort of the check category. But because the live players don't bluff enough or don't have that type of bluffing frequency based upon the texture, you can take a robust bet fold type of strategy. So I would mostly bet here. I think I would bet here a lot because I'm not concerned with the OMC guy. Now, if you put a Euro guy or some GTO All-Star guy, as Nate said in his blueprint course, like from under the gun, I might check more often because of the fact that the GTO All-Star guy from under the gun might be checking range here 4 ways. Just because he checks doesn't mean that he doesn't have anything, that he doesn't have you beat. But I think with the OMC guys tend to fit into that type of category. That's just my take. But okay, so you decide to check, and then the button checks as well?
No, the
Okay.
button bets 55.
Okay, so the button bets 55. Okay.
Small blind calls. Big blind folds.
Mm-hmm.
UTG folds.
UTG folds. Okay.
And hero calls.
All right, so the button bets 55. Small blind calls. Big blind gets out of the way. UTG gets out of the way, which is kind of interesting because you'd think if UTG had like high cards like ace king, he might peel here for one, but he decides to fold out. And now it's over to you. So the pot is what, 210, 55 for you to call. I mean, I would say kind of like as played, you probably just, there isn't a whole lot to do here, but call. I think, the button's range is kind of undefined, but there's a lot of turn cards that can come. I mean, I would call here. If I check the flop, I'm going to check call.
Okay.
Yeah. Is that what you did?
I did. Yep.
Yeah. All right. So hero calls. And we are at 55, 165, 265 to the turn, right? 265 to the turn.
That is correct. The
Okay.
turn is a jack of spades.
Interesting.
Very.
So the turn's the jack of spades. So you make trips. Okay.
What would you do here? Because I checked.
Well, so the small blind checked, right? To you?
That's correct. Yep.
Well, so this is kind of interesting in the sense that I don't find myself here in this spot all that much. But if I did check call, now remember, if you were behind on the flop, you're still behind here on the turn, with the exception is if someone had bottom 2 for 10-7. Like if you're behind to ace jack, you're still behind. If you're behind to a set of sevens, you're behind to a boat. If you're behind to 8-9, you're still behind, right? But I will say though, that the fact that another jack comes out lessens the chance that somebody else has ace jack. The fact that you also checked the flop after the pre-flop raiser checked, I think that this is important too. It's not like you naturally checked to the OMC. The OMC checked and you checked. The fact that you checked after him lends me to actually feel like I want to bet here because I actually think people might not necessarily believe that I have a jack if I check call lead, and they might call here with any type of showdown value moving to the turn, like with a 10. That's number one. Number two, my concern here is that if you put myself in the button spot here and I have bet the flop and I was betting a draw, I had diamonds. Again, it's jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, turns the jack of spades, right? Let's say I had diamonds. Let's say I had queen 9. Let's say I had king queen, something like that. Because the small blind called on the flop next to act, I'm pretty much checking all of my draws now on the turn. And then you overcalled here too. I'm not so concerned about you necessarily, even though you actually do have a jack now. But I'm concerned more about the small blind. Like I think any competent player here, when they bet the flop on the button and get 2 callers, especially next to act on the flop, is going to check through all of the draws. So if he's got a draw, he's going to check through here a lot. Now, if it was just heads up, like say the small blind hadn't called, say the button bet and you check called, and I'm still the button, and the turn's a jack and now you check, yeah, I would still fire a lot of draws. But when the small blind calls the flop, now I'm checking through all my draws. So it's a combination of, I think your line doesn't necessarily, it kind of looks funky and non-believable, and you might get called by a lot of showdown types of holdings by leading. And number two, I think that guy in position is going to be taking a lot of free cards if you check. So that's why if I found myself in this spot, I might be doing a lot of leading in the middle.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. So
What did
then
you do?
something.
What did you do?
So I check, and
Here it
so,
checks.
yeah.
Yeah.
I played this really passively. So something strange really happens. The button bets 80, and the small blind folds.
So the button bets 80. By the way, Got Your Home Ball says, so you want to telegraph what did he say? So you want to telegraph that you have a jack. I actually don't think it's telegraphing that he has a jack. He checked after the preflop razor. After the preflop razor checked. I'm talking about Van. And it doesn't matter because the guy's going to be checking through all his draws, which you don't want. So anyways, all right. Small blind checks, hero checks, button bets 80. Small blind folds. Okay.
Yep.
Uh-huh.
So we call, but do you think you're ever check raising here?
Well, now here's the thing, Van. If I thought that the button was going to be checking through with most of his draws here, but now he bets,
Right.
then probably no, I'm not going to raise, right? Because now he probably doesn't have many of his draw. I mean, maybe he overbluffs a little bit, right? But I would said that if you put me on the button and the small blind called next to act on the flop, I'm going to be checking through a lot of draws. So now I probably would continue with the passive line.
Yeah.
You're still losing to hands, right? You're still losing to hands. And the other interesting part about this hand, though, too, as much as I like to burn people, and I talked about this in an earlier type of I talked about this in an earlier hand. If the river comes a brick, you can actually still play a check call here because the guy might actually value own himself with trip jacks, with queen jack and jack nine, which you beat because you've played it so passively. He doesn't think that you have a jack, and you're also still behind to some other hands. So as played now in the small blind fold, I would probably call. So hero calls.
Yep.
So hero calls, and now the pot is 425.
That's correct.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
River is the 9 of hearts.
9 of hearts. So jack of diamonds, 10 of diamonds, 7 of clubs, turns the jack of spades, river's the 9 of hearts. It puts a one-liner out there to an 8, and it brings in king, queen. Right?
Yep.
Okay. So, I mean, definitely checking.
Yep. Hero checks.
Oh.
And then button uses a pretty chunky sizing. He bets 350.
Well, what's interesting here is that those hands that I talked about that you were beating, if he did have a jack, like queen jack and jack nine, you're still beating queen jack, but I think queen jack checks. And now you're losing to jack nine. So now you are behind to all the hands you were behind to anyways, if he had flopped 8-9 or a boat, 10s, 7s, whatever, jacks up that turn into a boat now. I mean, I kept saying that I think a lot of the draws check through right on the turn against two people. If he was betting king, queen, he has now gotten there. And there's a one-liner here to an 8. So you would basically be just praying that he had, and by the way too, that he had some sort of busted front door flush draw.
Right.
The other interesting thing about the flush draws is that if you take a look at what hands people play with flush draw, suited hands in terms of the high cards, right? King, queen, which is a straight. Queen, I mean, I don't know. So what else is out there here? King, I don't think he's got much. I mean, if he had 8x of diamonds, that now is a straight. So you're basically hoping that he has a missed, ace 6 of diamonds type of holding.
Missed draws, maybe a worse jack, but I feel like any jack there just checks.
Button will have more bluffs, assuming competent player. If button's good, I'm calling. I don't know if Bob Giorgio caught the beginning of this hand where I said, if you put me on the button, I'm checking through a lot on the turn. when the small blind calls next to act, and then it goes call, call. I mean, I suppose somebody could make the argument that Van had played it so again, that small blind next to act call though should be so strong that it just seems to me that the draw portion of, yeah, again, you know, I go back to like me thinking about like live streams and how much commentary that I've done on live streams, or just put yourself, like if any of you guys are the button and you bet like 5-6 of diamonds on the flop after it got checked to you, first of all, are you even betting that 5 ways? It's kind of a dry flush draw, or like ace-6 of diamonds. But even if you did, right, the nut flush draw, you get the small blind to call you next to act, and then you get Van, our hero from +1, to call behind. Are you betting the turn on a jack with diamonds when it gets checked to you? I think almost every competent player is probably going to be checking through there, which is kind of why it's a little bit concerning. Now, pot odds 350 and a 425. You know, you're getting obviously what, like, you know, over 2-1 here.
Yep.
Something like that. I don't think anyone's going to fault you for sometimes like playing a hand this passively and calling. I just don't like it. Not that it's not that I don't like, I'm not talking about your line. It's just, I don't like the spot. Like, I think you're beaten here a ton.
Yeah, I mean, in game, I realize that my hand is very under-repped, but given this game and this player pool and the lack of any sort of bluffing frequency on the river, I ultimately decided to fold.
So, hero folds, did you get a reveal?
Yeah, so when I was cashing out, I asked him, you know, what he had. First, he was joking around. He said I had a bluff, but he wound up having Jack 10, and he was pretty surprised that I folded my hand.
So he told you that he had Jack 10.
Yeah.
So he smacked it.
Yep.
Button has Jack
He also had a really low VPIP the rest of the session, so I
he
think
was
I blew
locking
him
it
there.
up.
Maybe, but he didn't
Yeah.
seem like the type to bluff those spots, so I think I believe him.
You know what's interesting here, Van, is that if you had bet the flop, I think that, you know, I don't know if he necessarily raises on the flop. So let's say he takes the call line with Jack 10, and now you've got trip jacks on the turn, right?
Mhm.
So you bet again.
Yep.
And maybe he slow plays it because he's got the absolute nuts and he wants to tie the small blind in. And now on the river, it's a 9, and you're like, fuck. Now you probably have to check, and then it's almost like a game of chicken, like whether you thought the guy would be bluffing here, you know, at the end with king queen coming in. It would have been interesting. It might have played out the same way.
I think it actually would have been easier if he took the call bet line, because when I see that, that's usually going to be really nutted. But the way that I played it here, I came really close to calling, but I just didn't think I was going to be good there enough of the time, even getting 2-1.
Yeah, I agree with you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Appreciate the call.
You're welcome. Thanks, Bart.
All right, let's move along here to the last caller of the day. And this is going to be Alwyn, who I recognize. I think he's been on the show a couple times before. Hello, Alwyn. You are up last, sir.
Hey, Bart. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Where are you playing out of, Alwyn?
This is out of a small little card room in Gardena, California called Hustler. Have you heard of it?
I have. Hustler. By the way, too, so Hustler doesn't really get what's the latest in the games at I was always amazed too, like with Hustler Casino Live, they don't really get a whole lot of large no limit games there, right? On a regular basis.
It depends on what you'd call large. I guess 5-5-10 is fairly consistent.
Is
I
it
think that
5-5-10
happens
is fairly okay.
every day.
Okay. Oh, it's going off
Um,
every day? Okay.
Yeah,
So you probably
most
see
days.
you probably see one of our instructors, Peter, stay in school. I don't know if you know who that is in there.
I don't.
Tall, skinny
I don't
guy,
know.
probably like late 20s to early 30s. I know he grinds that game quite a bit. I have Charlie, who hosts Third Man Walking. Probably
Probably
plays in that.
once,
Yep.
a
as
couple
well.
times there. Yeah.
So is this 5-5-10 or is this just 5-5?
This is 5-5-10. The $10 saddle is on. Yes.
So what's the cap in this game? Is it 2,000?
I believe it's 1,500 if I'm not mistaken.
1,500.
It's actually been a couple months since I played it.
So 5-5-10, it's a 3 blind structure, right?
Correct.
A fixed 3-blind structure. I really like that. I mean, I feel like that most live no limit games should go to a 3-blind structure. I mean, it's hard to do the ante thing because I think it slows the game down. Even though most no limit games probably should be, they're all supposed to be played with antes. Actually, any no limit game is supposed to be played with an ante. But I think it's very easy to just like make it 3 blinds, even at the low stakes. So what? Why can't you make it like 1, 2, 3? You know, it just adds a little bit more action to the game. But 5, 5, 10, 1500 buy-in. And what's the effective stacks here?
The effective stack will be the villain with 3,400.
Oh, so you guys are deep.
We are deep. Yes, this is a little bit of context. This is towards the end of the night, and on that note, actually, as this hand is being dealt, 2 people actually state that this is going to be their last hand and they're leaving, which would make it 4-handed.
So you think the game
and
might
so-
break right after this?
That's correct. In fact, as the flop is being dealt, a little spoiler, as the flop is being dealt, one other player then says, "I don't want to play shorthanded," and he grabs a rack to leave, which then creates a 3-handed situation. And both the villain and I know that this is pretty much a very last hand of the game.
So the reason why you might be bringing that up, Alan, is because some people might not want to lose all of their money, right, when the game's about to break, I would assume.
Yep, that will be one of the dynamics.
Or possibly make some sort of crazy move when they know if they're wrong, now all of a sudden they're stuck and they can't get it back, right? I would assume.
Yep.
Okay.
That is
all right. Start us off here.
Okay. So 5, 5, 10
Uh-huh.
pre-flop. I am in the big blind with ace of diamonds, 2 of diamonds.
And you say so it's 6-handed right now, is that right?
It is 6-handed. And yes, 6-handed. 2 people are already wrapped up and ready to leave, and 1 is about to.
So
Yes.
you're in the middle blind for 5 at 5, 5, 10 with ace deuce of diamonds. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
Mhm.
Cutoff opens for $35.
Okay.
The small blind, who is not a great player, is a calling station. He calls.
Okay.
I then 3-bet to 170.
I was gonna say, I mean, I would 3-bet this here. So you 3-bet to 170. I mean, it's such a. I mean, you're dealing with almost like free money in the small blind, right? I mean, somewhat. I mean, I guess if it's 6-handed, you could call it middle. You got a cutoff open at 35. A small blind calls, and you've got a suited ace. Now, granted, it's like the worst suited ace, but even still, it's such a profitable spot if you can get through the first guy, even if the small blind like flats behind you. I mean, I think you can be doing this with, I would probably do this with any suited Broadway, maybe like 6s plus, direct suited connectors with playability. This might be like one of the spots where I might be a little bit I don't know if you want to say the widest, but I'm taking all of those hands that are partial 3-bets and I'm 3-betting them here when it goes open call.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
Additionally, my image is actually really good at this point.
Mhm.
I've actually haven't really lost any major hands, and everything I've shown down has been the nuts or near nuts. So I have a very good image, which I know is one of your criteria for when to 3-bet and when to play more aggressive.
Yeah, in terms of your yes, godlike image. In terms of your people just want to stay away from you. You win a lot of non-shown down hands, which is great. So in terms of your sizing, what's 4x times 35 is what, 140. So you went like 4x plus the call, right? Ish.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. So hero goes to 170. Okay.
Only the cutoff calls. The small blind folds.
All right. So the cutoff calls and the small blind folds. And what's the deal with the cutoff?
The cutoff is fairly competent. He seems to be maybe not quite a pro, but at least relatively competent. A little extra dynamics involving him. He's currently up big for the session. I think he's up about 2K.
Okay.
Because I was there when the game started and now I'm here when the game ends. So he's up about 2K. So he has not shown any like bluffs or any major mistakes in my opinion. And so that's partially part of the dynamics.
So you get this dynamics where you and him both know this is going to be basically the last hand. This guy's also up, which again, a lot of people might want to lock it up or they don't necessarily want to risk a bunch of profit knowing the game's going to break. So those things are coming into play. All right. So 375, right, to the flop.
375 to flop.
Yep.
The flop is 6 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds, 2 of spades.
6 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds, 2 of spades. So you flop the nut flush draw with a pair. With a pair.
Correct.
That's interesting. So these boards, people look at that like this is not 6, 7, 8. This is not as connected as one would seem in the sense of like there really shouldn't be 2 pair here, and there shouldn't be 5, 3. So you don't have those types of holdings. So depending on what you want to do here, like this is a board where I would start c-bet bluffing with a lot of my holdings. And I guess you don't, and I think the theory goes that it's kind of a small bet. It's a small board. You can start to go large. Now, with that being said, if you wanted to check some hands, you might have one of these hands that you can sort of disguise in the form of having ace deuce of diamonds in the sense that you've got the nut flush draw and you have a pair. Like you betting here, if you start to take a really large sizing on the flop, I'm not sure if you can necessarily get called by worse here if you start to take a large sizing on the flop because you have ace deuce. So if you start going super large, you also have the ace of diamonds in your hand, which is on the front door side. So I don't know, like ace queen with the queen of diamonds, maybe that's like appeal, but it's kind of a little bit in between. So I don't know if I might want to take a small size or sometimes check here too. That's sort of my thinking. You're also building a pot up towards the nuts as well. I don't hate it, obviously betting and getting called.
Yeah, that was definitely something I was thinking about. This is a fairly low board. If he has any pocket pairs, they're probably going to be fairly high, like 7s, 8s, 9s, for example, and they're going to call down. And if I'm drawing to the nuts, for example, I do want to be able to start building up that pot to potentially stack off against him. Also, since I am drawing to the nuts, that is something that I should be able to identify whether or not I'm ahead or not. And that helps me.
By the way, if you do start to take a larger size bet too, I kind of washed over this. I would absolutely like to triple off on the right types of runouts here. It's kind of like you've got the best of both worlds where you actually have a draw and you can triple off. Because again, if you take a larger sizing here and get called, I don't really think that there's any way that you're ahead right now, like right now on the flop. So, you have to take that into consideration.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Yeah.
Also, because I 3-bet, there is the possibility of my range also consists of overpairs,
Sure.
Which
Absolutely.
could do that.
Yeah. Okay. So what did you
Sure.
do?
So on the flop, I bet 250, so fairly large, about 2/3 sizing. And he calls.
So here bet's 250. And the cutoff call. So you went 2/3. You didn't go crazy. Pot is 875. Somebody chimed in the live chat. What about backdoor Broadway types of holdings? Like what? King, jack of spades. I don't know. To 250 here, like king high and queen high on 6-4 deuce. When you're behind the ace high, it's not like there's a 9 on the board where you can turn straightening equity. Like if the guy's got like king jack of spades, king 10 of spades, like this isn't the board where he can pick up that equity. As opposed to it being like 9-4 deuce or something like that. I think those get folded out quite a bit, being behind the ace high. So now the pot's 875.
Correct.
Yep.
The turn comes the 4 of hearts,
4 of hearts.
which is one of those cards that would slow me down a bit, since if he has overpairs, he's still not going to fold. So I don't want to inflate the pot anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, my draw hasn't completed yet. So I do end up checking here.
So hero checks. What would you do? Would this card slow you down if you had an overpair here?
Sometimes, if depending on what type of overpair, if it's a non-vulnerable overpair, for example, like aces, kings, queens, where I think I'm likely going to be ahead no matter what, on a river, I probably would keep betting. If it's something closer to like 9s or 10s, where there is the possibility of him having potentially 10s, or something higher, I might check just to pot control.
See, I think that like when you start a bet like this on the flop, and we were talking about like running this barrel with this type of equity, that this is a good card for you. Sure, you don't necessarily expect sevens through jacks to fold right now. And this is why you don't have to necessarily go pot sizing. You can go like, size down a little bit to maybe, I don't know if it would be like half to 2/3 and then follow up on the river. But I just kind of feel like if I want to credibly represent, like I do have aces, kings, or queens, I don't think this card would slow me down if I had aces, kings, and queens. I mean, the guy's calling your 3-bet squeeze with the small blind having already called behind. And how that affects things is that the higher over pairs, I think, are incentivized to 4-bet from him. Like maybe even down to sometimes like tens and jacks to drive the small blind out. Not always, but he's going to be 4-betting more often here pre than he would if it was just purely heads up. And then I'm like, does he have a hand with a 4 in it all that often here that gets defended? I mean, maybe 2 combos of like ace 4 suited, I suppose maybe like 5-4, but again, you've got another guy in there. I just don't think the 4, I mean, obviously a deuce would have been a better card for you, but this card doesn't, a deuce would have been a better card for you because you would have had trips, but I'm not even talking about that. I'm just talking about like texture wise to run a bluff or better for an overpair. So I think I would continue to bet here, but you decided to check. Okay.
Yes. I think what you're saying is fair. The only thing I would potentially add is since the small blind is not a great player, there is a small chance that he may flat even with good cards to try and keep, for all intents and purposes, a fish in the hand. But I think generally you're probably right that he would 4-bet an overpair.
And the other thing too that's kind of interesting about this is that like, if you check here, if you check and the guy bets, right? I assume like the only option here is to check call. And the problem is that now by checking here on the turn, you've almost given up the opportunity to like credibly like to win the hand without showdown on a bluff at the end. Whereas if you continued with the lead, because say you check and he bets and you call, and now the river is like a queen or a jack, or even, God forbid, even a king, and you check the river and he checks behind and he wins with like 8s or 9s. You haven't been able to put him in a blender by continuing with the lead here on the turn and then triple barreling at the end, right?
I think that's fair. Another reason why I checked was based on whether or not he bet, and the bet sizing could tell me a lot about what kind of hand he had. For example, if he was also on a flush draw, there's a relatively decent chance he may check back to try and realize his equity. If he has a vulnerable pair like 9s, 10s, so on and so forth, he may bet a little larger, so on and so forth. So part of that was using the bet sizing to kind of understand where his hand strength was.
Well, yeah, but what if he bets like 350? Like, are you saying that you might check raise the turn?
No, I wasn't planning on that.
I mean, if he bets 350, like he could, that's the problem. He could still have like 8, I mean, he's making like a protection bet, something like that. But you check, and what does he do?
He bets 300.
Okay. How about 300? So the cutoff bet's
on the money.
So the cutoff bet's 300. And again, this is what my concern here is that, it's a weird one. Just like, I'm going to suddenly, if you're never going to play overpairs this way on the turn, it's kind of a little bit weird one to check raise turn. But now it's just, you've taken that line of being able to go bet. Now you're going to call. And then, I mean, okay, so let's say you call. What are you ever donking the river when you don't improve?
Depends on the river.
Like, what if the river's like an offsuit queen or king? See how kind of it's kind of strange?
Yeah, I probably wouldn't donk unless I had a pretty decent hand.
So you'd have to make
I think that's
something.
fair.
Right. So now by check calling turn, now you've basically given up the ability to win without showdown. If you see
That is fair.
If you see what I'm saying.
I do see that.
The other interesting part here is so you call, right? Cutoff bet's 300, you call?
I do.
All
Yes.
right, so hero calls. So the pot now is 1475. And Another interesting thing here too is that, and I don't remember what the river here is that what happens if the river is an offsuit ace? I mean, obviously, if it's what happens? Let's go through two different scenarios. Let's actually start with offsuit deuce. What would you do if the river was an offsuit deuce?
So I would make a full house, but bottom full house.
Right.
I would, given I'm in position, I would probably take one of two paths.
You're out of position, right? You're out of position.
I'm out of position.
Yeah,
Sorry, that's
yeah.
what I meant. I'd probably take one of two different paths. One is probably bet relatively small and hopefully induce a raise, and then I would just call that off, or I would do a check call, given that a lot of the draws do miss with a two.
I don't know, man.
And he may.
I mean, I don't know if I would. I mean, you're the one that has the diamond draw. The problem here too at the end with checking I understand that you're it's just like the whole line with him betting 300. It just seems like he's got 8s or 9s. River's a deuce. It's just gonna go check. You know what I mean? Quite a bit. So there's that. How about if? And then again, you're the one that has the draw, so I don't know how many draws here are really missing. I mean, yeah, okay, like king jack of diamonds, king 10 of diamonds. You've got ace deuce diamonds in your hand. What if the river is an ace?
If the river's an ace,
Like the ace of clubs.
Yeah. I would probably lead on that card as well. I'm trying to think sizing wise. I would probably lead relatively small and hope for a crying call from pairs like 7s through jacks or whatever pairs are in space.
I think that I would probably, if I played it this way, I think I would probably lead on both of those cards. The deuce is quite interesting because of the fact that you could put yourself in a situation against a good player where he puts a lot of pressure on you, thinking that you never have 6s the way that this is played out, and you very rarely have a 4, and I do. So I'm going to put a bunch of pressure on you. Again, the great thing about live poker is sometimes we don't need to worry about that. I suppose you can make the same case with an ace where you could open yourself up to being in a very tough situation if you get raised, if you make any of those hands and then you lead. Again, with that being said, though, the pot starts to get big. You've got all this other dynamic stuff in there. It's just the frequency of getting bluffed is kind of small. And I suppose you could say the same thing. I was talking about a deuce or an ace coming. How about if a diamond comes? By the way, what is the river?
The river is indeed a diamond. It is the 3 of diamonds.
Okay. So so it's the 3 of diamonds, and it also puts out a one-liner now to a 5 because it's 6-4 deuce 4-3. So do you agree with me that hands like 7s through jacks are basically going to check back if you check, unless somehow they're turning it into a bluff?
Yes, I do think a lot of hands are going to be checking here.
Right. So now the question here becomes, well, I made my hand. I guess it's kind of sort of very similar to the deuce and the ace coming. Maybe you put out, but the other thing though too is that now someone 7s through 10s and jacks, they can't even beat a 5 here. And a 5 was a wheel draw. Ace, if you had 3-bet with ace 5, they can't even beat a 5 because it's 6-4 deuce 4-3. So if the guy's got 9s, he can't beat diamonds, he can't beat a 5. So that might make you even sort of want to block size down more to 400, 500, depending on what you're trying to target here. It's definitely, I don't think it's a card that you can bet large on. That's for sure.
I think your reasoning is fairly correct. Unfortunately, at the time, I was thinking I like where I'm at, but there are some potential hands that might beat me, like 6s, which I didn't think was that likely, 6-4, and so on and so forth. And just in case, I led with a sizing that would be fairly large, with the intention where it seemed like I had no fold equity. My hope was that if he did jam, he would know that it's not going to get through, because if you're bluffing, I don't have that much fold equity, so it'd make his bluff significantly lower.
Why-
So I did bet fairly large.
How much did you bet?
I bet 1100.
Yeah, so here's the thing. We'll get to the second part that you just talked about here in a second. But my question to you is, what are you trying to get called by here by betting 1100? If do you think that sevens through jacks is going to call 1100 here when the front door diamonds come in and it's a one-liner out here? Because I think that this card on the river, it's not just any diamond. It's the fact that it puts a one-liner out here to a straight, and people love to 3-bet ace-5 quite a bit, forces you to almost size smaller than this. Do you, like, what are you trying to get called by here?
Actually, I'm not trying to get called by pairs anymore now that I've hit. I don't think pairs are going to call most sizes. I wanted to be called by those specific lower flushes or by that one liner to straight. If somehow he has 5-7 as well, that's an even higher straight that could be calling. Those are hands that I was hoping to get called by.
So you're trying to target a 5 or a lower flush for the most part.
Correct. And in my opinion, I didn't think that those hands would be able to re-raise, given that one, I blocked the nut flush, and I also block some of the full houses. So I didn't think he was going to be re-raising without a very, very strong hand, like a full house.
Well, right. And for the most part, I do kind of, I mean, that's another technique that you can use in live poker is, you know, you're betting to get the most amount of value, and it also decreases your bluffing frequency, which will sometimes allow you to sort of bet fold to aggression more easily. I mean, if you get aggression here, this one's going to be kind of brutal because, I mean, the pot's going to be really, really large and you guys aren't going to have that much behind. I mean, it makes sense what you're saying. I guess I can get on board with the fact that if you're only targeting like a 5 or smaller flushes, but again, though, you have, you know, you basically block a lot of the combos, though, of flushes because you have the ace of diamonds. So, I mean, how many flushes really are there? And then, sure, like he might bet flush draws on the turn. And then of the hands that he's got that have 5s in it, would he bet 300? I suppose. I just wonder if you can still get like a what the fuck type of call from everything else in his range that are over pairs by betting like 400 or 500 or something like that. But you took the larger sizing, so you go 1100. Okay.
He thinks for about 5 seconds, and then he jams for his entire stack, which is 2680 total.
So cutoff jams for 2680 total. So let's do some math here. So 2575. So just about 26 plus about 27. So it's like 5250, 1680 for you to call, something like that.
Yes, that's what I have.
50. 1600 to call. So you are getting over 3-1. 6 of diamonds, 4 of diamonds, deuce of spades, turns the 4 of hearts, rivers the 3 of diamonds, hero with ace, deuce of diamonds. 3-bet pre as a squeeze, took a 2/3 sizing on the flop, got called, checked. We talked about the turn quite a bit. We checked the turn on a 4, called 300, and then the river makes the diamonds on a 1-liner to a 5, bets 1100, and the cutoff jams for 3250. You have a deuce in your hand that blocks pocket deuces. If he's not playing 6-4 suited, by the way, there's only, well, I guess there's 2 combos of 6-4 suited, so you would be losing to what? Pocket 6s, 3 combos of pocket 6s, 1 combo of quad 4s, 1 combo of pocket deuces because you have a deuce in your hand.
Mm-hmm.
And then I suppose he could have pocket 3s here too, because, you know, 3s is a gut shot on the flop, and then he's just betting for protection on the turn. So he's got some of these hands in here. Yeah, I mean, from a theoretical perspective, I'm sure you're supposed to have, you have to have some hands to call with. I mean, here's the thing. if you're not really 3-betting like pocket 4s and pocket 6s in this scenario, then you have to call with something. So the answer would be, well, nut flushes would be there, right? The reality of it, it's, you know, it would be a fairly exploitable fold that might be correct, I would say, in live poker. I personally might flick in the call. Curtis Hustler says, I'm not folding this combo at Commerce. Nate says, is this dude up big? Yes, he's up 2,000. Also, as Alwyn said, everyone knows this is the last hand of the night because the game's about to break, which I'm sure Alwyn has taken that into consideration.
Yep.
So those things all lean towards, oh, we should overfold this spot. He's up big. The game's about to break. And that would make him probably bluff less. We are getting just about 3.5 to 1 here. And the other thing too is that, like, is there any hand here? I always go back to this too. Is there any possible hand here that ever raises all in that's worse for value? So Alwyn's got ace deuce of diamonds on 6-4 deuce 4-3. There's a one-liner out there to a 5. So would the king high flush here ever raise all in for value? If I can ever conclude that I can find possibilities that anybody would raise hands for value that are worse, then I would call. The interesting part of this one is that, is it possible that you could be betting a 5 here at the end? And if I've got the king high flush in your opponent's hand, if I'm your opponent and I have the king high flush, and I just don't think that you really have any boats here, and you might have a 5, and it seems to me kind of strange the way that you played it, like if you had the nut flush draw because you didn't barrel turn, maybe I would. It's not that big of a jam. It's only like, what, 2.5x? And then we get into situations where it's like reverse pot odds, where I'm like, you can jam lighter. Like your opponent can jam lighter here because of reverse pot odds. And what I mean by that is that you're getting a better price. He just doesn't have that much because it went from 1,100 to say 26. So, you know, you're always going to be getting over 3 to 1. So I don't know. I mean, you wonder if he might jam here with something that's weaker. If we say, no, he's never jamming, that's fine too. But yeah, this is a pickle. What did you end up doing?
I tanked folded for probably the longest time in my life. And since this was the very last hand, nobody called clock. So it ended up being close to like 10 minutes. And the dealer, I felt bad, was kind of going into the next shift. Eventually, after like 5 minutes, I ended up folding. And as we were racking up, I said, would you mind telling me what you had? And he actually flipped over and showed 7-6 of spades.
7-6 of spades. Oh, wow. So he turned his 6 into a bluff. Is that right?
Yes.
My
Yes.
God. Oh, Alwyn.
Yeah.
Well, maybe he knew that you knew that the game was going to break. And he knew that you knew that he was up. And he took that
Yep.
all into consideration.
That was a lot of the dynamics of that play.
Oh, wow. Yeah, man, that's why I kind of felt like I would just kind of flick in the call with the nut flush. But I mean, I don't think anybody can, I mean, we were sort of 50-50 in the live chat, but I appreciate you calling that one in. Thank you very much, sir.
Of course. Have a good rest of your day.
All right. All right, guys. That is going to wrap it up here for us today. Thank you very much for joining me. Again, if you want to get in on the show, you can click on the link in the description, and that will get you information on how to pre-submit your hand, because you must pre-submit your hand if you want to be on the show. We are always looking for new callers, especially CLP website subscribers that might be new callers, but even people that aren't subscribers. We will be back at the same time next week. I'll have probably some more information as I look at the WSOP schedule. Thanks for joining us this afternoon, and have a good week, everybody. Bye-bye.